the last time we spoke, that was at Forecastle Festival here in Louisville.
Yeah, it was like 1,000,000 degrees, and we were all sporting our chicken legs, I think.
Right. And I was thinking about that, especially in relation to where we are now in the world, because that was right after the marriage equality thing had happened. And we were both in really sort of good spirits about it all, thinking like the world has changed and everything is better. But as I look back on that interview, you were a little bit cautious about that feeling. Like you weren't exactly sold that that's where it was going.
Right. Yeah. You know, one of the main reasons for my sobriety, the sobriety I had then, and really the sobriety that grew as the 2016 election approached, you know, I was privileged to see a lot of country on tour, a lot of the world, and see a lot of some of the great cities in Europe, and kind of sense the comparison between the way the world was moving here versus there, and also the way the world was moving differently in different parts of this country, moving in opposite directions. And as you know, as we traveled, we're, you know, a group of guys. One of us is white, and depending on where we, you know, what gas station we pull into, we'd either be safe or we wouldn't. And that was nothing I'd ever experienced before. Just flying around the world, driving around the world, walking around the world as a white guy in my white family and my white world. So it's one of the great things that I love. I love my bandmates. They're my brothers, and one of the things that it's a weird thing to, I don't really know how to articulate it, but one of the things I've learned just by spending time with them is catching just the smallest glimpse of the world through their eyes. You know, in our little chat before we began, or as we were beginning, you used this term side eye, and I actually I've thought about that word recently, with respect to some of the experiences we've had, where I catch people giving my crew a side eye in certain scenarios where I never ever felt that before. And so this sort of like mounting racial tension, you know, just driving around this country, starting to see bumper stickers, they were just like so vitriolic and so full of fear in the form of aggressive pride, and just realizing, wow, there's an inertia forming that's gonna pull the pendulum. It's gonna swing that pendulum hard. And yeah, so if I had in our previous encounter, if I had a measure of, if I wasn't quite inebriated enough by the moment, it's likely because I was in the process of really starting to see things through different lenses.
When it happened, and I say it, and I think we all know that the it at this point with the capital I starts with a capital T. When the election happened, I mean, did you sense that there was an actual possibility, given everything that you just said? Did you think like, oh no, this could really happen? Because as we all now look back on it, and most of us were completely blindsided.
I felt like it was going to happen. I had predicted the result. I had seen Michael Moore speak in Michigan. I was up there around the time of his Traverse City Film Festival in the summer, and as you might know, he was very famously a contrarian in the build up to the election, in that he felt that he was sure that Trump was going to win. And I think that he felt that way because, for the same reason that I felt that way, which is that he just had enough conversations with enough people, and had been and was open to the idea that this mounting inertia was going to be one that was easily activated. Mm-hmm. And he was totally right. So basically what he said when I saw him speak is that the reason why Trump is going to win is because Democrats don't vote, Republicans vote, Democrats don't vote. So if that difference, even if more people, even if there are more Democrats than there are Republicans, registered, or let alone not registered, you still have to overcome the turnout difference. And he had a great point because, he's right about that statistically, but at the same, Democrats don't even vote that well when they love a candidate, let alone when they don't love a candidate, right? Mm-hmm. So someone like Hillary, who had a lot of passion behind her from some people, but a huge amount of dispassionate support from everyone else. Well, dispassionate support doesn't translate into taking time off of work. If you're young, or even if you're not young, you work on an hour or something. You have to basically take a financial hit just to vote because this country's stupid and we vote on Tuesdays. You're and if you also sense that just the sheer idiocy of just perplexing, unfathomable chasm of between logic and his way of communicating and thinking. If you sense that, you're like, well, there's no way in hell enough people are going to buy into this guy. When the rubber meets the road, everybody's going to be sensible, and they're just going to be like, well, I really want this guy representing us in the world. No, and then people just didn't show up, right? Mm-hmm. People didn't show up. More people, of course, millions more people showed up for him or for her than for him,
but not in the right spots. Yeah,
not in the right spots, right? And Michael Moore called it, man. He's like, and actually, she's gonna lose right here in Michigan, he said she's gonna lose this region, and the region and people were laughing at him and booing, and these were his supporters, out to see him and stuff, and people were laughing, and he's saying, he was like, I know you feel safe in this liberal community here in Traverse City, but walk 5 minutes down the street and talk to your neighbors, and you won't feel so sure. And the reason is because you might get, everyone in this room might vote. You're not going to, but everyone in this room might vote. But what are you going to do the week of the election, the day before? Are you going to take off work? Are you going to make some calls, encourage your friends to vote? No, you're not going to do that, are you? And once a week for the 3 months leading up to the election, you're not going to set aside time to call, to make calls and to volunteer. You're not going to do that, are you? You're not going to, and he's going to win. And he was totally right. And if he had won, if like Traverse City was part of, if like a tiny part of this state was part of another state, the whole thing would have been totally flip flopped, and it all came down to any one of a few states, right? Could have really made the difference. And Michigan was one of them.
So Sunlux reconvenes and you guys get back together. Did you go back to the studio because of the results, or were you going back in there anyway?
That's a good question. We had already had a schedule. That week was already scheduled here in Los Angeles. The guys were in town. I live in LA now, and they live still in New York. But so the guys were in town already. They'd flown in. I think the 7th. I think like on Sunday night. So Monday was our first day together. Tuesday was our second day together. That night, we knew the results of the election. On Wednesday morning, we didn't go to the studio right away because we took a long breakfast to process things together. And we felt, of course, that now more than ever we have a charge to do the very thing that we feel mounting pressures and forces set against us to do. And in a sense, I'm not one of those people who say, out of my exorbitant privilege, that times of suppression of the arts are when the greatest art is made. I'm not one of those people who says that. What I will say is that there is a clarifying impact that the election and the what has transpired since and what will continue to transpire. There's a clarifying impact that all of that has on the music that we were writing and are writing and will continue to write. And basically, practically what that means is, let's say we've got 20 ideas, 20 fragments of songs. Some of them, I feel, what's their purpose? What is the sort of intangible urge behind this thing? And we now feel that much of those intangibles have an outlet, and there's a target, even if only philosophical, for some of the energy behind the weapons that are these sounds. So, and I don't think that we could articulate what I just said right away in the week that followed. But looking back, that is really what we were feeling. Is that, well, now it's time to get to work. We came to play, and now we realized at that moment we were there to work.
And as I look at some of the lyrics on this, they really come into clarity, because one of them, find your voice to find a remedy. I also find interesting that it's sort of, and I'm going to take this one out of context, but contradicted by a line of, I don't have to be a part of this, although I do realize what you're saying there. Mm-hmm. And it's so
well. What I'm saying there is twofold. It's for me, what I'm saying there is both. It has two meanings, and they are opposite. So I don't want to be part of, in the eyes of the rest of the world, in the eyes of the divine, in the eyes of anyone. I don't want to be associated with what's happening. I want to be the furthest thing from it. That line also means that I want to resist. I have an inclination to resisting, because it requires labor, and we're not inclined to labor to the degree that we need to. And
right.
So there's work involved.
I'm guessing you didn't go into the studio with nothing. I mean, some of this existed beforehand. Did it? And if so, did you find it dramatically change once
we went into the studio with a bunch of stuff, but we set aside it. We basically set aside almost everything, and we just started making sound and started pulling scraps of things that small scraps of a tiny little fragment of a furious, anger-filled, irrational drum fill that we never used from a totally different song, and then found this curious section of it that when repeated reveals itself to be rational, and that's the drums that march through the song Remedy. It's taken from another idea, but we zeroed in on the fury, and the fury of that performance, of that tiny little moment of literal aggression toward the drum heads, and we brought sanity to it through repetition, again finding the rational in the irrational, and then allowed it to be the march of that's part of, but that's part of that. It's that undergirds that melody, which is metaphorically Remedy. The idea behind that song, my wife and I were in Los Angeles marching the Women's March, and I noticed that there was a lot of urge to sing, and there's a lot of urge to play drums and things like this, but there wasn't a lot of like unity. Like people didn't really have, songs wouldn't really catch on. They'd catch on for a second, and and I was like, man, it would be really cool if there was just, imagine, it's like right over there's 20 people singing together. Like, doesn't that sound amazing? Imagine if there were 200 people singing. Mm-hmm. How much more amazing. And I remembered, or my wife remembered at the time, that I'd done this thing 5 years ago where I crowdsourced a choir from Twitter, through social media, to just ask people to sing with me. And I got 50 responses, and about 35 of them were useful. It was for a small project that I never really released, but it worked really well. And Jen was like, you should write a protest song, or something like a protest song. And then I had this I was so inspired by this idea of hundreds of people singing together. And and then I was like, wow, I should try this again now that I've more social media following, and I could get more specific with my technical requirements, so that what people send in is like everyone basically is useful. And I kind of idiot-proof the system, and I have some technical help and all this stuff. So I basically wrote this song, this very simple song, and I made a very simple recording of it, of just me and piano. It's a totally misleading version of the song, but it's just like the bare bones version of the song. And I sent it out, and I invited people to sing with me, and we got about 325 voices. So the idea is the line is find your voice in the sea of surging bodies and breath to form a melody, to find a remedy. And, just trying to call on that feeling of just being among tens and hundreds of thousands of people, looking for my own voice to actually to together form a melody. Just like that's what the inspiration was about.
Potential to be a great live moment right there.
I know, yeah. And there's a connection from that song to the song before it on the EP, which is a song called Stolen. The final stanza of Stolen sets up Remedy, and it's basically it's a song that's inspired heavily by Masters of War, Bob Dylan's Masters of War. And I'm basically stealing his concept of like where he describes that he'll follow this person's casket and watch as it's lowered, and he'll stand over this person's grave until he's sure that he's dead.
And one of the most powerful musical moments of all time, by the way.
Of all time. And I feel like this year I've loved that song for decades and felt the power of it, but never in the way that I felt it this year. And I was inspired to create something a fraction of with a fraction of that power and sentiment. And if I've done so, 1%, I've succeeded. But the final stanza is essentially saying, like, may the last thing that you hear be a surge of sound that's a joyous sound, a cheer loud and clear, the last thing in your ears, as you hear what you stole, stolen from you. And actually, right at that moment, there's a sample of the choir, the crowd choir, that we'll later hear in Remedy, that shouts after that, oh, right after that line, and then the song yields to this. Stolen yields to the aggressive march of Remedy, and we hear the voices of hundreds of people singing together. And it's kind of, to me, that those songs, though sonically, there are a couple things that are similar, but they're very different songs. But there's a theme that connects them.
It's an incredible EP too, an inspired performance. Unfortunately,
Yeah.
I want to twist it right there.
Yeah.
As I wrap up here, I'll also point out, so folks know, the proceeds go to the Southern Poverty Law Center too, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah, which is
awesome.
Kind of really stepping up to the plate for the entire cause. So completely commendable. Thank you for the conversation, Ryan. It was really fun.
Yeah, absolutely, Kyle. It's really nice to talk to you.
Yeah, well, and I say fun in a really odd, warped way.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel limber, though, more so than I did before we talked. So I have you to thank for that as well.
Yeah, well, let your audience guess what that's about.
Exactly. All right, buddy. It was good talking to you.
Yeah, you do. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.
Bye.